What were your initial impressions of Lazar?
I found him to be extremely credible. Just, from living here my whole life, born and raised, native Nevadan, being around a lot of people that were involved at the test site, being involved in a lot of cases in court that revolved around the test site. And Yucca Mountain, actually, I was part of that. Did the security team for the trial they had with Yucca Mountain on an individual that got injured out there and lost an arm. So I got a lot of inside info from the guys that were working out there. I running around with a notepad talking to them all the time, because if it was anything test site, I tried to switch it over to, well, what do you know about UFOs then? None of those guys would talk, though.
Was that pretty much universal? Anybody you knew who might be out there in a position to know something exotic, you'd ask them about it and they'd clam up.
Oh, always, yeah. There was nobody that wanted to talk back in those days, especially. Now you find a little bit more. You find people running around that claim they know something, but it doesn't take long. As long as I've been around this stuff and being around it with like yourself and others, you can sniff out the BS pretty quick. And they start throwing the typical names down or the typical places. Like half the people don't even know what S4 was, and until Bob came out and you came out talking about S4, that was non-existent. Everybody thought it was just Area 51.
Back in those days, there was so much that happened on a personal level. Threats that were made to Bob, people that followed all of us around, trying to keep tabs on us, intimidation of witnesses that we'll get into. Did you find that to be credible? I know that you and we did pay some visits to Lazar's house together, or we were there at the same time before. It's hard to convey to people what that time was like, how really, truly weird it was, and that these events, these threats, these break-ins were really underway. Can you remember many of the details about those events?
I remember he was going through a great deal. I mean, he was constantly being intimidated. And then shortly after your special broke with him, he was terminated out there. And he kind of was doing a lot of seclusion. I mean, I know at that time he wasn't talking to anyone rather than you or his few close friends, like Gene Huff. I know he was always in the mix somewhere. And
unless you were there, it's hard to get the sense that he really was worried. He was scared about what was going to happen to him back in those days. There were a lot of really strange events and inexplicable intrusions, things of that sort. When you hung out with him person to person, was he trying to convince you that UFOs are real, or trying to cram this down your throat, or just give me those kind of impressions?
No, he never tried to. In fact, you had to sit down and pry anything you could get out of him. He did not feel as though it was necessary to tell anybody or explain anything. If you knew him and he was in the right mood, you'd get to talk a little bit. Or because I was with you, I'm sure I got to hear a lot of things that a lot of other people have never heard, just by virtue of being part of that small group and having his trust. And, when he got inadvertently threatened through the court system, through Judge Lehman's court, that was quite profound. I know we haven't talked about that a lot, and that was one of the things you might like to talk about.
Yeah, we will. I'll lead up to it. So we can now say it. I mean, we can never say it before, but you were sort of one of my secret weapons during this. You were helping me behind the scenes in a lot of different ways. So now it can be said, but you wanted to help back then, right?
Absolutely. I think this is something that needs to be out there. I've always kept my fingers crossed and thought, well, maybe we'll get lucky one of these days. They're not going to land on the White House lawn. But I thought eventually it would get credible eyes on it from somewhere, which is now all happening. But back then, I was trying to do anything I could to press it forward. And I mean, you were my absolute best link to be able to, anything I found out was to get it to you. Otherwise, it wasn't going to go anywhere.
One of the things you helped me with was to try to find witnesses. I had gone on the air. I made an open appeal. I said, hey, look, I know there's people out there in this audience watching this television show who know something about this program out there. and I encouraged them to reach out to us. And one of the people who reached out through you worked for the Clark County court system. Can you tell me about her? We can hold her name, withhold it right now if you want, but tell me what your relationship was with her, how you knew her, and how you came to know what she knew.
Well, it was no secret back in the days when I was back in the juvenile court system that I was interested in the topic. And the young woman you're speaking of, well, out of courtesy, I call her a young woman. She was a little bit older than I am. She was a court clerk. She knew I was interested. I always had stuff sitting, either a book or something I was reading. And we started talking one day, and she had mentioned that she actually worked and scribed a lot of meetings for a company she worked for, Holmes and Arbor, I believe is the way you say it. And I know they contracted through EG&G. They were on the test site. She was actually present in rooms that were considered quiet rooms, white noise rooms. They even had a room that had windows in it that when they'd flip the switch, it would wipe the windows out. So nobody on the outside walking down the hallways could even see inside. She was attending the meetings. I know at the end of her meetings, the topics were always collected from her. She didn't actually do the transcribing herself. She only took the notes. It was later given to somebody else that transcribed them. So she walked out of the room only with whatever she overheard and whatever she scribed.
There was a particular meeting that she told you about involving Holmes and Arbor and military people. Can you recall what she told you, the version of the story?
This one, in particular, I can't think out of the conversations I had with her, that one's not ringing a bell.
Okay.
I might need a couple of prompts on that. I'm sure it would come back to memory though.
What you had told me was that she conveyed this story, that she sat in on a meeting, and one of the topics that came up, it was between Holmes and Arbor, her employer, and military officials who were talking about wreckage, strange materials that from a crash site that somehow had been sent out to Area 51.
I now I recall what you're saying. That was the hook to 1947 and to Roswell. They were talking about we call it metamaterials, or all the strange artifacts that were found out there, and that company was the keepers of the artifacts. And I don't remember. I know that they were kept out, not at necessarily Area 51, but on the test site somewhere near Area 51, that there was a facility out there. She discussed that. They discussed the actual, the makeup of these materials, where it was, some of the materials could match to Earth, like a titanium or an aluminum or whatever, in these alloys that they were studying. That's got to be what we were talking about.
Yeah, so there was a strange material that was somewhere out at the test site. The implication was it came from somewhere else, that it wasn't ours. That's the story that you conveyed to me.
Exactly.
And then
yes.
I asked if she'd be willing to talk to me, whether we could protect her identity. What I wanted to do an interview, either on camera or audio or whatever. And then, I reached out to her, and suddenly she wouldn't talk to me anymore. We were going to have a meeting, and it ended. And I wasn't able to reach her. And then you fill in the rest of that story. Uh-oh, there we go.
Yeah, I know that she had set something up to speak with you regarding her experiences out there. She had gone to Southern California to visit her kids, which were adults. And she was contacted and told that the desert was a very big place. It was really easy to lose people out there, and that she shouldn't really be talking about anything that she had already signed a non-disclosure agreement on to begin with. And they just made it really convenient for her to shut up, or something was going to happen to somebody.
She was legitimately scared, in your judgment.
Oh, absolutely. It actually changed her personality. It changed our relationship. We were pretty good friends. And after that, she just never felt comfortable around me. And I couldn't even bring the topic back up again, because she'd essentially collect her articles and walk out of the room and go back to her desk or wherever she was done.
So she perceived this as a legitimate threat.
Absolutely. And it was primarily, she was more afraid for her children than she was herself.
How do you think they found out that she had had that conversation with you and then that she was in contact with me?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? I have no clue, but it's just funny. It seems like every time, if you do retain any of this information along the years that you've picked up, it just never fails when you start to talk about it. Here comes somebody into your life that wants to know about it, that all of a sudden you either didn't know them that well, you didn't know why they want to know, what's their interest. It's just interesting how they always seem to find out in these circles. I mean, I know you're constantly monitored. I mean, that's obvious. I don't know how else to put it, but I mean, once you've got their attention, I don't think they ever forget about you.
She was one of 6 people who had agreed to speak to me, who talked to me on my phone at KLAS TV, who was visited within a day or two after speaking to me and agreeing to an interview. They get visited and told to keep their mouths shut. So I reached the conclusion that somebody was listening to my phone, presumably without a warrant, to see who was trying to help me. And today we assume that our phones are monitored, that all electronic communications get sucked up into some giant supercomputer and stored somewhere. But back then, it really ticked me off, the idea that a reporter's phone would be listened to and monitored.
Absolutely. And which tells you they're concerned about what you know. Otherwise, why would they bother? If you're some crackpot out there or just seeking headlines, what would be there? I mean, I don't know, but what else could you presume other than that you personally were being monitored?
I tried to reach out to her a decade later to see, well, enough time has passed. Maybe she'll speak to us now, not even using her name. She was still scared at that point. Did you ever have a chance to speak to her after that, or she stayed away from you for the rest of your career?
No, I actually left the court system in 90 and went to the district attorney's office. And so that effectively ended any routine conversations we'd have. I was in another building in another part of the county, maybe ran into her once or twice, and it was nothing more than just, hi, how you doing? How you been? And just left it at that. Never, she certainly never brought it up again.